Thank you guys so much, first of all, for coming to our second annual sold-out conference. I think we're really starting to build a community here. This subject that we're going to be speaking to now is the policy piece, which is messy. We're up against entrenched industries, and we're a young organization that, while I think we are noble in our goals, we shouldn't be naive to the battle that we're going to be facing against many of these entrenched industries. So we need the power of the collective, and we really need to get the wisdom of the group, take policies that have been working elsewhere, and try and get them in front of policymakers in Canada and explain to them that this makes sense, and show them bipartisan support for agrivoltaics that is happening south of the border. I think that's an amazing thing that we can showcase to politicians in this country to show that this is politically palatable. So this is going to be a bit of a free-flowing discussion on policy, across Canada, focusing mainly on the major power markets, so BC, Alberta, and Ontario, largely. There's the land use piece and also the electricity framework within each province that's very nuanced and so complicated. So I expect we'll hear from each of the panelists, but would very much appreciate the continued engagement. I know many folks in this room are in the trenches and have views on policy-related matters. So welcome the wisdom of the group and engagement from the rest of you. So I guess maybe we'll just start and go west to east. And Jeremy, if you want to introduce yourself, maybe speak to the call for power in BC, how you perhaps see solar playing a role in what's traditionally been a hydro and wind-dominated province, and speak to what you see on the ground there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeremy Dresner from Energy Redesign from British Columbia, and here to talk to you about the British Columbia policy situation and a little bit about the context of the policy situation in BC. I'll go back a couple of years and explain a little bit about myself on the way. 2021, I moved from Vancouver to the Okanagan, and the Okanagan experienced record heat in the heat dome, got up to 45.7 degrees in Kelowna at the height of it, and there was the largest death from any Canadian weather event in history, with 570 people dying in BC because of that heat dome. And that's concerning, needless to say. 2 years later, and West Kelowna, closest to me, experienced number of loss of homes in the wildfires there, as we experienced the worst wildfire season in BC's history yet again this year. So the climate context in BC is one that's just very real. The good news is that Clean BC has been active for a number of years, working on electrification projects, working on a number of schemes to move the province to a low-emission future. And that has basically been relying on electrify everything as the strategy. The good reasons for that is the power system in BC is 98% hydropower and wind power, and as a result, electrifying brings down the emissions. The issue is that with exceeding the expectation for electric vehicle transition significantly, we've shot past expectations, and now mandating by 2035 100% electric vehicles in BC, we need a lot more power. Already 10% of homes have heat pumps. That's going to be all homes by 2040. So this is the context in BC. There's a very urgent need, and there's a very clear pathway to deal with it, which is electrify, but there's not enough electricity. I'm really happy to say that this year, finally, BC Hydro saw the light and have put out their first call for power in 16 years. And they're looking particularly for projects which are large. So those developers on the larger side get interested in this. 30 to 50 megawatt size, mostly wind. They were looking for solar as well. They're not discriminating. They'll take any power. We are explicitly here to discuss what that means for farmland and agrivoltaics. In British Columbia, there's the Agricultural Land Reserve, which manages the farmland in the province. And, ISE's research shows us that we need just about 1% of farmland to have agrivoltaics to meet the electrical needs of British Columbia. So what are farms in BC? Farms in BC are quite different from farms in Alberta. They are almost all, the large majority are much smaller farms. There's a lot of hobby farms. A large proportion of the country's cherries, grapes are grown in BC. I think it was in 980 vineyards at the last count. It's grown massively. If you've never drunk BC wine, that's because we drink it all. It's pretty good. And these fruit farms and small holding farms have their own unique challenges with integrating agrivoltaics. With Uzair, we saw his designs at this conference last year. When I say we, I mean Jacob, my partner, is over there, and we loved the wooden designs. Wood, lumber. The main export from British Columbia is lumber, so a wooden solution to agrivoltaics made sense in a BC solution, in a BC situation, and so we spent a couple of weeks on Jacob's land in the summer, the height of the summer in Osoyoos, the only desert region of British Columbia, and we were digging holes and cutting wood and building those frames, and really happy to be trying that out. But what are we going to? And I will say, Uzair is a great man with stats, but he's also a man you literally want in the trenches with you when you're digging those things. It's fantastic to work with. What are we going to grow underneath? Originally we thought grapes, but anyone who's ever done a wine tasting will know that grape people are very particular about a lot of things. And so in talking to some farmers locally, it seems like we're going to, after doing some soil samples, we're going to look at cherries and we're going to look at apples as well. I've learnt about a certain type of cherry tree called a UFO cherry tree, which grows wide and flat, which is important when you're looking at agrivoltaics. And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples of stone fruits and other small fruits that we could try for agrivoltaics. But this is the point. Most farmland in BC is small holding, and if we're going to cover 1%, it's going to be done on a kind of boutique basis. A lot of farms are opening themselves up to diversifying their income already through things like events and having on-farm sales. There's a high proportion of that in BC than anywhere else. So wooden, attractive, small agrivoltaics, if we can cover 1% of BC's farms that way, that's how we'll do it. There are also fantastic opportunities in BC with regards to greenhouses. BC has the highest proportion of greenhouses of any province, and there are opportunities there. There's 150 ag-tech companies in BC, a lot of high-tech mind and muscle going into looking at ways of innovating in that concept, in that construct. I'll say this about the Agricultural Land Reserve. They control what can happen on a BC farm. They've explicitly said last year that vertical farming and intensive farming methods will go ahead without particular reservation. So our idea on Jacob's land is to take the agrivoltaics and to power some containerized vertical farms to grow things inside there. I will hand over to Mike.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Do
Jerry.
you want to just speak to the Alberta?
Yeah. I'll just do it quick. Yeah, so Mike Carter, I'm going to speak to Alberta. We do have a resident expert as one of our founding members, Claude, who's currently dealing with what I'm just going to quickly touch on is the Alberta context as that relates to the, I guess, the current pause that's happened for renewables in Alberta. My background was involved with, before solar, developing hydro in BC, and it's really interesting that, you know, so many years later, solar and wind are the dominating factors where hydro really was going toe-to-toe at that time. Totally different world. It's the reason why I'm in solar. I would love to still be a hydroelectric guy, admittedly. It's a multi-generational thing, but solar is my future, and agrivoltaics is how I want to, is the path. I developed projects in Alberta, conventional solar early on, the early days. We had to do it subsidized through grant programs to demonstrate technologies that the CAMED office that Chris is representing later had helped us assess. Within a year, we submitted competitive tenders, unsubsidized, to the Alberta government, 100% of the procurement with the designs that had been initially granted because of the acceptance and lack of that. I think we've got some representatives from Alberta here that are going to demonstrate that we don't have to modify conventional designs at all or very much to show meaningful benefit from agrivoltaics, and so I'm really excited about that. But Alberta, the reason why I saw the opportunity with agrivoltaics, as I learned, I was a bit of a naysayer. I was really questioning whether this was something that was logical. I come from a background, hydro first, solar, no. But as I realized, stakeholder, public, government involvement, concerns around farmland, those are the reasons I was against solar in my past. Those are the issues that I saw coming to a head. I was worried we were going to see Ontario happen again in Alberta, and sure enough it did. And so what we're dealing with right now is in Alberta is effectively a pause to the large renewable, large solar development plans. We're seeing billions of dollars either put on hold or canceled. The energy transition is being rapidly, massively disrupted and has been for the last several months. That's the long story short for Alberta. And I think we'll probably dive into it a little bit more, but that's what we've been at the front of. We've been on a number of projects that have been effectively halted, paused. There's other things on the go, but that's a major, major ding to the efforts for the energy transition. And I think we are an answer to that problem. If we were 2 years ahead and we were having this conference 2 years ago, we could have pointed to the YouTube videos that every single politician would say, no, don't take farmland out of production. This is a problem. And then we would see, solar sheep, and we would see all of the different folks that are here that are saying, no, there is a better path, and that's what we really need to be doing. Meaningful agrivoltaics, not greenwashing, not faking it, genuine, meaningful integration of solar and farming, and there's going to be things that work and things that don't work. We need the universities to study that stuff, the stuff that's not economic, get it to a scale, and then we can deliver an economically viable path, and that's my game. So,
Mike, you're one of the converted now, by the sounds of it. We're working to convert many more. So, hi everyone, my name is Eric Muller. I'm the director for Ontario with CanREA, the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. I'm new. I joined a couple of months ago, but I've been in the Ontario electricity sector for coming up on 14 years now, across the Independent Electricity System Operator, the IESO, the former OPA, if anybody remembers, the Ontario Power Authority, and also some time at a national NGO called Quest Canada. I just want to acknowledge as well in the room that I've got some of my members here. So just want to say hello to our members. CanREA represents wind, solar, and storage companies across Canada. And I also want to acknowledge some former IESO colleagues who are in the room as well. So just catching everybody's eyes right now. Ontario all over again. That was quite interesting, Mike, because I've got some data on Alberta that our data guy pulled up for me. In 2020, let's talk about utility scale solar installed in Alberta. In 2020, 76 megawatts was installed. In 2021, 250 megawatts was installed. This is in Alberta, utility scale solar. 2022, 745 megawatts installed. And now 2023, as of now, 250 megawatts. So I think the short expression for that might be, this was market-based and it was based on corporate power purchase agreements, which was mentioned earlier. But I think the short punchline there is too much too fast without integrating enough agrivoltaics into this mix. And Ontario all over again, you're talking about, the FIT program, and myself and my colleagues kind of lived through that at the OPA. So many renewables brought on very quickly at, highly incentivized costs and prices, and then the big pushback, and hundreds and hundreds of megawatts of contracts, hundreds of contracts canceled in 2018 under the new government that came into power. So I think that a key critical challenge here is the social license piece. And I really view social license being community acceptance. And I really see agrivoltaics as, one of you said it's the way, a key part of the future. And even great to see Kevin and others, from large renewable organizations embracing this as well. I think if I'm representing the industry, our industry needs to come around more to this and realize that this is the way. It's the way to be able to enable more renewables in Ontario, in Alberta, and all across the country. And a couple last points before I pass it to Rob. It's very timely that we're having this conversation right now because was mentioned earlier was the corporate power purchase agreements. There's regulation right now in Ontario being consulted on that could take effect in May of next year, which would mean all of a sudden large corporate buyers could be purchasing, contracting with developers, suppliers to build wind, solar, and other renewables, battery storage, hybrids where you've got wind and battery, solar and battery, and they're going to need to find places to site these projects. So that's something just to keep in mind. It's coming, and it's going to come very quickly. And the second thing to keep in mind is the IESO and the Ministry of Energy here in Ontario are just embarking now on the long-term 2 RFP. It's the LT2 procurement, and they're going to be talking about this in a couple of days from now on a webinar. And really what we're looking at is major energy needs coming in Ontario. The first big procurement that will involve renewables, wind, solar, biofuels, storage, etc., in something like 10 years. And it's under the current government, which might be a surprise to some. So this is coming as well. And I think they haven't announced the energy numbers yet, but there are significant needs over the long term. And I think it's looking like hundreds of megawatts per year of needs. The last thing I'll say, since I know we're talking about BC, Alberta, and Ontario, is just to provide a tiny bit of color on Quebec and Atlantic Canada as well. Quebec just announced their clean energy plan, and it includes 10 gigawatts, 10,000 megawatts of wind, as well as other renewables. So they're forging ahead, thrusting ahead to double or triple their grid in the next 25, 30 years. And the same story is in BC. The same story is kind of across the country, as well as Nova Scotia, Clean Choice program. They're bringing on hundreds of megawatts of renewables as well. So the context here is there is a ton of energy need coming in all jurisdictions, and we're going to need places to build this in a way that's responsible and makes sense for the land use and so much more we can get into in discussion. I'll leave it at that.
I'm actually going to keep my comments really short. I think 80% or 90% of what needs to be said has been said. So I'll just give myself an introduction. Rob Sinclair. I used to work at ISO. I've been a power system planner for a couple of years and planned much of the north. I've also ran the feed and tariff program for 5 years and contracted over 1,000 megawatts of primarily solar in Ontario. So I have a pretty good idea of kind of where renewables fit into the ecosystem here. And as we're all aware, we've taken a pretty long pause in contracting and bringing online new renewable energy. We've seen some very small systems come on through net metering in the last couple of years, but it's really been a trickle. And so, we've talked about the sustainability aspect and the doability, if you will, of agrivoltaics as being the way forward. I think today, given the policy kind of considerations that we have in Ontario in particular, that we don't even need to make, like, there's a general perception that you can't do solar on prime ag lands. And I think if you wanted to walk in and, carpet a field with traditional kind of solar racking, that's probably, that is the case. But I think the way that the regulations are set up today, it doesn't mean that we can't do agrivoltaics, which are adding on to the agriculture. They're not displacing agriculture, they're adding on to it. And I think either with some very minor regulatory changes or with educating policy people and the people that operate the regulatory regimes to understand what agrivoltaics actually does and what its impacts are on the land, I think, especially in Ontario, we can move forward with agrivoltaics without significant changes. Now, we've already heard about Ontario starting new procurements. The ISO has identified that over the next 15 to 20 years, we're going to need 40% more electricity capacity than we have today. So, that's a significant growth in a system that has 25,000 megawatts of peak demand and over 40,000 megawatts of generation today. We're seeing Pickering be retired. We're seeing some older gas projects be retired. So there's a need for new things, and that's why the ISO has run the long-term procurement one, which was largely a capacity procurement. That's why batteries and gas were procured. But going forward, renewables are going to have to be procured because they can't procure any more gas. And even when they're procuring gas, communities are pushing back, right? They pushed back in Northern York region 20 years ago when they put a peaker there, and they're pushing back in other communities. Now, they're not just pushing back on gas, they're pushing back on batteries. They're pushing back on many things that are seen to be in conflict with the values of the community. And so if I can leave any one last piece, I think the education that we need to do is critical, and the perspective that we need to take is dealing with the conflict. And through education, helping people understand that adding solar onto a field, keeping that field in production, making the farmer viable for the future, and ensuring that these energy projects are adding to the value, the overall value of the community. I think that's what we need. Otherwise, we're going to end up exactly where we were in 2010, 2012, 2014, and in fact where we are today with many battery storage projects that are just being pushed back upon. So if we can, this group I think is critical to taking that message forward. It seems that most of the people in the room are, if not strongly supportive, quite supportive of agrivoltaics. And so educating the people that you live near, educating the politicians, educating the agricultural officials in your counties, I think is absolutely critical to making this work for the future. Thanks.
Just want to add on to that, Rob, that a lot of the kind of what we're hearing in communities for batteries is they're new. We aren't sure about how safe they are. What about fires and things like that? What do we do in those cases? And so I think drawing that same parallel to agrivoltaics, it feels new and niche, at least to me and maybe to some in this room, but maybe to others it's actually quite mainstream. So I think it's how do we cross that chasm from niche, early adopting new technology to something that is considered mainstream. And I'm thinking about my IESO colleagues in the room as well, and Ministry of Energy folks as well, to get people comfortable with this as a regular solution along with all of our other energy solutions.
So maybe just want to comment to us sitting here with CanRIA, and early on, so Eric, we really appreciate you coming, and early on our discussions with CanRIA, we're trying to understand how we would differentiate ourselves from CanRIA, and some of the conversations were aspirationally, maybe we effectively at some future date become redundant because we've actually moved the CanRIA and the solar world and their position so much so that we can only push so far in agrivoltaics if that becomes the standard bearer for solar. And I think that we've had a really open and great dialogue, and quite frankly, a year ago to now, all of the majors, I mean, Kevin really, it was so impressive for us to meet up with Kevin after Pat was down in Chicago and realizing EDF have been in these trenches for quite some time doing this. Kevin's done the homework. We learned a lot from, we were down to meet Kevin to sort of opine and share about what Agrivoltaics Canada had learned. They're there. Right? And so many others have come along either quietly or in the last year. Things have really changed. We would have a lot more of your membership here right now, but for a submission due tomorrow, that into the large scale procurement that's happening tomorrow. So there would be a number of large scale developers that are savvy to this, aware of it, have programs in place, are accepting it, and we just need to continue to advocate and share the message. But it's from a year ago, we're sold out. We were telling all of our friends and colleagues that many of you are here. Oh yeah, just show up, we'll find a ticket. Well, oh yeah, no, just come. And then all of a sudden Ivey started saying, no, we're actually sold out. We're not just like sort of saying that, like we can't do. So this is a very popular event. And so this is, thanks to everyone for coming. And just, I think the message for me is advocate, advocate, advocate. There's a different way to look at it.
So yeah, I think we just want to open up the floor. Let's hear from you guys and the perspectives that you bring from various places across Canada. And yeah, any questions?
How far off do you think we are to get the policy and legislation to allow these kind of projects to move forward? As we know, they lump everything ground mount into ground mount, and everything rooftop into rooftop. And how do we get the policy to allow ground mount and agrivoltaics to move forward on class 1 through 4 land? Or, none of this, is relevant if we can't get the policy to allow us to move these projects forward.
Sure. I think there's a lot of discussions. I mean, I can't give you a definitive answer, and that answer it changes if we're talking about Ontario versus Alberta. So there's a lot of active discussions in both Ontario and Alberta at the moment. Through that pause, I think just speaking for Agrivoltaics Canada, our job in 2024 is to really ramp up our engagement and really strengthen our voice through the community building that we're doing through conferences like this, and actually starting to better operationalize. I mean, we just incorporated in June 2024. So we've been running this as a volunteer organization with enthusiasts, and we really need to formalize in a hurry because we're running out of time. So you can expect to be hearing from us, and in all sorts of ways. You can expect to be hearing from us, calling for support, but also hearing from us in terms of we're going to be, better on the communications front, webinars, educating the public, sending you materials that you can use to help influence policy, and just trying to get that strength in numbers.
Pat, maybe just might add that I think it can be really close. And I think it has to do with being seen as a genuine farm-friendly solution. I think that it's not by coincidence that we've really made an effort in the last year or so to make it clear. And I think that was a big takeaway from the US was the farm first solar planning. And so we do have, I don't know if we have locally here in Ontario, I think we need to have good farming representation. We obviously have great representation from sheep growers. But having people like the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, I mean, many of us in here are members, and I think that those are bodies that historically have been fighting for the cultural, maintaining farmland, maintaining productive farmland at all cost. And that was a noble battle. I have a different opinion, just as I have a different opinion on solar now, I have a different opinion on productive land protection and farming protection and farm economics protection. But that's a very difficult conversation to have. I'm sure there's a lot of you in the room that will have the same difficult conversation with me as I've had with my growers, my farming neighbors, as well. And it's like, these are tough conversations, but there is a resolve. And I think even having an opportunity where the OFA will take a position and change that, they're very strong in terms of influencing OMAFRA locally. And OMAFRA is taking some of the direction, Ministry of Energy is taking some of the direction from OMAFRA. So it follows the chain. So having genuine farmer-led engagement and support of this is a personal goal of mine.
Thanks. Just to add on to that, just to say that it's a great question, how close, it's a live conversation right now. And one thing to point out is that the IESO has been asked to report back to Ontario Ministry of Energy on a number of different questions, including use of renewables and siting of renewables on prime agricultural lands or not. It's not a binary question. It's just tell us your opinions and research and how we might explore this going forward. So I think it was neat to see some of the New York examples where you can have adders and different, if you're on this class land, this particular class, you'll have this amount of points, or if you're using agrivoltaics, you can have that amount of points or that kind of thing. So live discussion, IESO has to report back to the ministry by the end of February on that question, along with many other questions.
I know there's other questions, but I just want to add one small point. Earlier in the year, Agrivoltaics Canada submitted a policy response to the Ontario government asking that the ancillary use piece, I can't think of what to call it, but that agrivoltaics be considered an ancillary use on farms, which would then, if that were allowed, or the existing legislation interpreted that way to make it acceptable, then it should be, full steam ahead essentially.
So no legislative or regulatory changes needed under that.
So maybe others can comment on this as well too. I know I've had some similar conversations with the IESO. There seemed to be an opening for pilots, and I don't know, and that's typically the baby step they would take next to build greater acceptance and get data. I'm not sure if that's the next step, and that's what we should be pushing. In that same vein, I like Mike's comment around farmers first, but I don't know what the economics look like. So, I mean, if you go to a smaller scale type projects, again, if that's another baby step, but I don't know if the economics can work for not utility scale, just small scale projects. And again, politically, I know that sprinkling those around also is a way to build support, and you don't get the big backlash for very large scale developments.
My concern with the pilot situation, which I think is the historic and right way to approach, is we're making some very major energy decisions in the province that are going to sort of set the stage for the next 10 or 15 years, like yesterday. So this is the problem where we have to really push now. I do feel like we're running out of runway to get this message out, and I think it was a conversation I had with the Ministry of Energy 6 months ago that really flagged this is happening now, and we were out of time then, so we're really out of time now. So for me, there is a genuine urgency to get this message out and advocate as much as we can to whoever we can. Please tell your friends, your neighbors, your politicians, your friends in the industries. This is what I think. Even just to flag them to watch a video or two. That's what we need people to do. So that's my issue with the pilot program.
Well, can I add to the question and the comment in that having pilots or demonstration facilities is key. And I hear this from landowners, like as I help out to deal with the farmers or ranchers, from large corporations, and from just generally all of us, is that, pardon me, people want to see it demonstrated at scale. And I speak from experience, having helped to design and implement a nationally and internationally renowned smart farm looking at ag tech. Farmers wanted to see, show it to me first. So both farmers and regulators and business, they need to see a place where they can have access to operations and to research. That's key.
I guess maybe I would agree with that, but not small scale pilot. I think large commercial pilots.
That's what I'm saying. I'm talking commercial scale, like thousands of acres.
Yes.
Agrivoltaic. operation at an enterprise scale. That's what I'm saying.
We agree.
I have a very quick question about the transition that happens in Alberta. So what will you say were the kind of metrics that the government will look at to make such a decision? Is it more on a social scale, or is it more like some other type of data that they look at to decide that no, now we won't be doing large scale solar anymore and just cap it out?
I'll try, but you want to give it a shot? I may give it a shot here. So, right now, there aren't really conditions for anything over a megawatt. It's paused, right? Like the intake is paused for any new projects to come. And there's been a number of justified reasons for this, whether it's grid connection or farmland protection or just managing the capacity or damaging the gas business case for the gas generation, which would see some future knock-on effect to managing the grid. So there's been a number of different reasons for it. I don't know, and that was sort of one of those things that very quickly, another reason that came out eventually was that there was some clean fuel standard matters between the province and the federal government, that there was also some negotiating going on there. I think we are in some ways kind of the solar industry has been sort of just caught up in some jostling. But in terms of the rules around siting, that's what they're getting feedback on right now, and that's what people are submitting their responses to at the moment around where those new regulations are going to go, and there's going to be a demobilization. Deposits on taking these things out, citing what are we going to have similar legislation like in Ontario where they exclude vast swaths of classifications of farmland just simply because it's farmland. That's agrivoltaics hasn't really been considered in that effort, and so we're hopeful that our efforts at the last minute have been sufficient in changing that scoring.
I would just say there's an assumption in your question that data is being used to arrive at the decisions. Which not necessarily the case in Alberta, but it's
Eric, you mentioned all the contracts in 2018 that were canceled and some of them even torn down. What do you think the government needs to do on top of incentives to regain lender trust and also to incorporate, agrivoltaics in current FIT program owners? They're kind of scared to even touch their contract or come up from the shadows at this point. So what do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. We're working as hard as we can on behalf of our members to seek certainty from government. The same kind of question posed in a different way. How can we be certain that government is not going to cancel contracts again down the road? Or under a corporate power purchase agreement, how can we be certain that the regulations that are the foundation for that, or the program that's the foundation for those agreements, isn't going to change down the road as well? And we're just we're looking for as much certainty as possible through our advocacy. And lenders similarly are looking for that same certainty, financiers, to be able to say, yes, we're ready to finance these projects. So there's a little bit of certainty that's coming through these new procurements, the LT2 with the IESO. You'll see in a couple of days when they do their webinar, the approach that they're taking is not like all of a sudden we're procuring and then all of a sudden we're done, a boom and bust style. They're going to be taking a bit more of a cadenced approach to those procurements over time, so that it provides a bit more certainty to developers and to the market that there's going to be ongoing needs rather than a big boom like the FIT program and then the bust that comes afterwards. Or for another example, energy efficiency programs at the federal level that, all of a sudden got heat pumps all across the country and incented that, and all of a sudden now they're oversubscribed and talking about winding down on that. That's the NRCan Greener Homes program as an example. So I think there's probably dozens of examples in Ontario and other jurisdictions around the challenges of that. We talk to elected officials and also unelected bureaucrats, and the best they can say is we can't guarantee what future government's decisions are going to be, but what I do know is that the energy needs in Ontario are growing immensely, and so we're going to need. I think someone also said we're going to need everything. That's nuclear, OPG, exploring small modular reactors. It's hydroelectric and expanded hydro, and it's wind, solar, and storage. And I know Ontario has its gas things going on as well, which I won't comment on. But we're gonna need all the energy we can get. So I think that's a major driver of demand. Anyone else want to add on to that?
I'll just top up really quickly. Corporate PPAs, power purchase agreements, I should say, in BC. There's the call for power is for 2028. 3,000 gigawatt hours of new power is required, but they're also looking to renew 7,000 gigawatt hours of existing power purchase agreements. And speaking to the drought conditions that we've seen in BC this year, most of BC's water basins were in level 4 or level 5 drought status this year. That's not great if you run your provincial electricity system with hydro. But for developers who might be here, that also presents an opportunity at those grid connections for new ways of putting power onto the grid. And that could provide a lot of opportunities for solar when they come to renew those power purchase agreements. The full rules are coming out early next year, but it's going to be, they need power by 2028 operational, so this is happening soon in BC.
Just curious, so my company's active in ELT1, LT1, submitting tomorrow. We will be active in LT2. Just curious, your thoughts on the municipal support. So from the FIT program, it was kind of like a top-down approach. Municipalities didn't really have a say. We're obviously going a different route with the long-term procurement with municipal council support resolutions. Bottom-up approach, that seems to take a lot more time, especially just the number of municipalities that there are to educate everyone, bring them all on the ride. That would be the ideal approach. But we're running out of time. We need renewables. How does that work?
Yeah, I think a short answer to that is that's still an open question on exactly the requirement for municipal support resolutions for future procurements. Striking that balance, as you said, between moving things ahead quickly, but also making sure that the municipality, the community, and everyone in the surrounding area is on board and comfortable, which is very, very important. And there's things like resolutions that are one tool, but also developers, our members, need to do very, very good community engagement from very early on. So I would just say that my read of the current government, is that they want municipalities to be on board along the way for whether it's gas, batteries, renewables. And I can totally understand that perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. So, I don't think there's a silver bullet or, hard and fast solution, but good developer engagement early on and seeking municipal support is a very important thing. Absolutely. You need that social license. If you do it hard and fast again, what's going to happen from there, right? Probably some blowback.
To touch on our opening remarks there, Indigenous partnerships, right? Hydro One, any project over 100 million in capital costs, Indigenous communities have the opportunity to become 50% owners of Hydro One assets. Pretty historic, right? So to the developers in the room, I'm a consultant helping developers on gas, battery, solar, wind projects across the country. Those equity partnerships, right? Ontario, Hydro One, that's our precedent now. And so time is of the essence, but yeah, you know, that social license, important from a municipal perspective, but equally, if not more important from an Indigenous community reconciliation and capacity building perspective as well.
I'll just top up on that a bit as well. The province has provided $140 million to the BC Indigenous Clean Energy Initiative. And that's a funding partnership between the province and the federal government and what's called the New Relationship Trust, which helps Indigenous communities in BC develop solar and wind and renewable projects. That's massive. They've had 26 million over the last 5 or 6 years, and now suddenly they've got 140 million to develop new projects. The large projects, equity involvement is being discussed currently, but it's looking at full equity for bands that are interested. Personally, been working with Jacob, who's from the Soyuz band, and that band is in the desert BC, and they've got a lot of interest in solar. And I'll just say one last thing is the entire announcement for BC Hydro's new call for power was announced by the Premier, David Ivey, and he announced it in front of a small solar installation, 134 kilowatts on the Tsleil-Waututh Nation's land. So it's not always what's written down, it's a little bit reading between the lines about how these announcements are done. But yes, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, projects should be starting at the very beginning from their conception with equity for Indigenous farmers.
I'm just being yelled at that I think it's break time now. But let's definitely continue these conversations over breaks and over lunch throughout the day. So loving this engagement.